In this year's political forecast, the most competitive races in Massachusetts are expected in the primary scheduled for right after Labor Day on September 4th. If much of the country is fiercely divided between Democrats and Republicans, the local ballots are highlighted by insurgents versus longtime incumbents in their own party. To bring us up to date is a reporter for Politico Massachusetts, Dezenski. Thank you very much for being with us, Lauren.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, the insurgent versus incumbent that we've been all talking about in much of the country lately is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York. Tell us about her. Reminder of viewers who are not familiar with this race.
Yeah, she's 28 or so, challenged longtime incumbent Congressman Joe Crowley in New York in a district that was fairly diverse and had really changed a lot. She drew out enough voters and kind of activated this base on this message of progressivism and saying that, yes, Joe Crowley has been around for a while, but he needs to be more progressive. He needs to be more liberal, and was really kind of touching on some of the things that were seen and activated in the Bernie Sanders campaign, things like Medicare for all, very, very much more progressive issues. She was also interesting, too, because she self-identified as a democratic socialist, which is kind of beyond the pale, at least from what we've seen here in Massachusetts. And so to see the type of success that she had in that race, in that type of district against someone who was essentially number 4 in leadership in Congress has really kind of sent shockwaves around to other races in the country and here in Massachusetts as well.
Well, in that district, it includes part of the Bronx. So you say, well, there's a growing Latino population. But there are all these millennials, and these are people who might have even grown up in white people who grew up in the suburbs. I mean, so how do you get from that to socialists?
Right. And that's a great question. And how exactly that messaging happens and how she was able to kind of grab onto this captive audience, I guess. I think it's fair to say that a lot of these voters were activated by the results of the 2016 election, by Trump's victory, in trying to, identify ways in which that they could get activated and get organized. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was very fascinating because she threw elbows. She made it clear that she was taking this race very seriously, was very critical of Joe Crowley, very vocally, and I think that kind of made people aware of the fact that the race was as contentious as it could be.
And how her message circulated. I mean, the New York Times almost completely missed the boat on this, but Ocasio-Cortez, she was reaching people through these other vehicles. I mean, these websites that 20-something women were reading. I mean, I don't read them.
Well, it's interesting, too, because social media was also a really, really critical component of her success. And even just anecdotally, I have some friends down in New York City that were sharing photos of this candidate, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, on Instagram during the Pride Parade, leading up to the campaign itself. And so subsequently to see her victory, which, for me as a very, very far outside observer, to see that she was victorious and to know that even people in my random social media circle had been supportive of her was, I think, kind of spoke to how deeply she was able to connect with her voters.
Well, speaking of photos on social media, we've seen the photo of her with Ayanna Pressley. So should Mike Capuano be worried?
This is something that I think Mike Capuano has taken very seriously. As an incumbent congressman who has served for 10 terms, he very much is acting like this challenge from Boston City Councilor Ayanna Pressley is serious. The interesting thing is that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez kind of throws elbows in a way that we haven't seen Ayanna Pressley do yet. And so while Pressley has seen an increase in traffic, in donations, in Twitter follows since that victory in New York, it stands to be seen how actively Ayanna Pressley will really make this a race and will really go after the incumbent in a way that she just simply hasn't yet.
Well, one thing that I think you and I have both noticed is that shortly after that upset, Pressley got a lot of more inquiries, and there were endorsements. Michelle Wu, Russell Holmes. I mean, does that mean anything?
There's two different sides of this. On the first side is that endorsements are, just some kind of superficial thing and doesn't necessarily represent much. But on the other side, endorsements are also an effective way of showing who is with whom at what time. the incumbent Capuano has been really effective in locking down endorsements from people that you would otherwise expect to be with Ayanna Pressley. And so subsequently, it's been on Ayanna Pressley to basically prove that she still has the coalition that people would assume that she would have. The endorsements that Capuano had are folks like Deval Patrick, the Congressional Black Caucus PAC. Those are two individuals, two groups that you would think that Ayanna Pressley would have locked down and secured their support. So Pressley kind of coming to this next step and saying, all right, well, all the people that I've worked with, or these people that I've worked with on the Boston City Council are supportive of my congressional campaign, also says something about kind of the next step of where she's going with her campaign.
This has been the news, and we're talking with Lauren Dezenski from Politico Massachusetts. Lauren, in a more micro level, we have a race for state rep in the 15th Suffolk District, and this goes from, I think, Mission Hill, Hyde Square, Pondside, Jamaica Hills, and there's an insurgent and an incumbent. So what's going on there?
Yeah, I think if you want to draw parallels between the Joe Crowley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez upset, the Pressley-Capuano race is less of a direct connection, and this race between Ways and Means Chair Jeff Sanchez and in newcomer Nika
Elugardo.
I completely fumbled her name, so thank you. She is this really, really fascinating example of someone who is very much going after someone in Massachusetts State House leadership as Ways and Means Chair, which Jeff Sanchez is, in saying that Jeff Sanchez is not progressive enough. He's not liberal enough. And this is something that you and others have observed in completely activating voters in that district. There was a recent debate moderated and hosted by the JP Progressives, as well as some other groups, that had a line snaking out of the door. And I think in mid-July, I certainly haven't seen that type of reaction for a local state rep debate. I
cut ahead of the line, so I know you're not exaggerating. That's right. But I guess, what does that say? I mean, you say, well, that's a candidate's night, and the people who come, they've already made up their minds. So does that mean anything?
I mean, it's hard to say. In a local race like this, there's not any polling. You don't really know where voters are other than just kind of anecdotal evidence. And I think that so frequently in Massachusetts, as well as in other parts of the country, local races are examples of where incumbents have an advantage, where incumbents have name recognition, they have a record to run on, and it's very easy for them to be reelected. But when a newcomer candidate who is running on a message of health care for all, really, really, really progressive ideas, when you're able to draw that type of enthusiasm to a primary race, I think speaks a lot to at least the temperature of the voters themselves. Whether or not this challenger is successful in unseating this incumbent, I think that it means that leadership in the House should be aware of these progressives and should at least listen to what they're saying, because clearly what she's doing and what she's saying is striking a chord with the voters in that district.
One other challenger who's trying to knock off a long-time incumbent is Josh Zakem, another city councilor against Bill Galvin as Secretary of the Commonwealth. Does that make much of a parallel?
Somewhat. Josh Zakem really does benefit from name recognition. His family is the same family that the Zakem Bridge is named after, and he's someone with really, really deep ties in Boston itself. We've seen in recent polling that while there's a lot of progressive enthusiasm around Josh Zakem, he was the winner of the Democratic Party's endorsement at the state convention earlier this year. Polling shows that Josh Zakem really has very little that he's registered among Democratic primary voters. Obviously, there's 8 weeks left until Election Day. It stands to be seen how he can actually pick that up, but where and how he's kind of organized and activates his voters stands to be seen.
Lauren, you're a great reporter and curator par excellence, so if people want to keep tabs on you, what's the best way to do that?
Thank you so much. It's at the Massachusetts Playbook.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Lauren Dezenski from Politico Massachusetts.